somewhere on YouTube. Okay, so I just want just basically the bottom line here. What were you telling us earlier about the cost of lives associated with gasoline and the fuel, Middle East?
So the most difficult thing one of the more difficult things we do is bringing fuel into theater. It's a challenge going from Pakistan, the ports there, up through Afghanistan. All along the way, there's challenges with insurgents, with IEDs, and so what we have found is that for 1 in every 50 fuel convoys, we have one American killed or wounded, and for us, that's just too high a price to pay for fuel.
Well, what about, you were also talking about the cost in dollars.
Sure.
And I mean, when the average American feels it, how does the Navy feel it when prices skyrocket?
So for the Navy, in effect, a $1 increase in the price per barrel of fuel is a $30 million bill to the Navy that we've got to find internal resources to pay that down. And over the past year, for example, our energy budget that we had planned for, and what we saw in June of this year is that fuel budget changed $38. And if you spread that out over the course of a year, that would equate to $1 billion of budget uncertainty.
Yes.
And that's $1 billion that we need to find from other sources. And where we find that is from what that does is impacts our flying hours, impacts our what we call our steaming hours, our ability to sail our ships, to fly our planes, and given all the missions that we're called to do, humanitarian, providing support to Libya and Afghanistan, and all the other issues that we do in fighting piracy off of Somalia, that's just too much of a challenge for us to continue to work on. It's too great. The volatility is simply too great a burden.
Well, yes, and you were talking about that essentially because so much of our costs are tied to simply the price of fuel, which is controlled by other countries, that the fate of our force can lie in the hands
certainly,
of other countries.
I wouldn't say that's necessarily the fate of our force, but certainly they have a say into the hours that we steam and the hours that we fly. And for given all the missions that we have, that's just an unacceptable level of risk for us. And we think alternative fuels, domestically produced alternative fuels,
yes,
provide us a way to mitigate that risk. And
what are the most exciting alternative fuels right now that you are seeing the most promise in?
Well, I'll just start by saying that we are open to all fuels, feedstocks and the technology processes that come with that. And I think there's excitement around so many different areas. Algae is one. You see the agricultural products and oils. You see municipal solid waste as being one. You even see the waste products from the ethanol industry, whether that's the corn stover that's not plowed under, or whether that's the yellow grease that's not used in the ethanol process. Those can actually create fuels as well. So there's a range. We don't have a preference with those. What we do have a preference on, and what we're required to do, is that any fuel we purchase has to have a life cycle greenhouse gas emissions equal to or less than petroleum.
Right.
We also want to make sure the fuels we purchase don't compete for food, water, land use. I mean, those are things that we also are concerned about. As the ultimate purchaser and customer of this fuel,
right,
we need to be on the right side of those stories too.
Now, this may be less applicable to the Navy, but what about wind, solar, etc.? Are you using any of these technologies? I mean, these are the ones that most people know the most about so far.
So absolutely, we're using wind, solar, geothermal. Maybe I'll start there. We have a 270 megawatt geothermal plant in California that we've been operating for 20 some odd years. Most of the people don't even know about it, but it's enough power to not only power the base that we have there at China Lake, but to provide more than 200 megawatts of power to the grid. With respect to wind, we have about 6 megawatts of wind power right now. We have what are called anemometer studies going on, about 24 of those worldwide,
right,
where we're looking to site wind in places that don't conflict with our mission. And then with respect to solar, we have tripled our solar capacity over the past year, and we're going to double it again. And so right now we're about 14 megawatts of power, and that's last year we had about 5. And so just in 1 year we've gone from 5 to basically 14 or 15, and we're going to double that again in the coming year.
Now, those that are on the opposite side of the climate change hypothesis or theory would say that's not money well spent, costs too much money, this will never come down in price, oil, we should be drilling for more oil. What is your experience here?
Well, I guess what we're seeing. Well, first of all, we do have federal drivers. We have federal mandates that we're beholden to with respect to renewable energy.
Yes.
And so those are things that we're certainly cognizant. We have our own goals that, in many cases, in effect, go beyond those as well.
Okay.
And again, for us, we see this as an energy security and national security issue. And so for us, it's really it's trying to have an impact there as well. And what we're seeing as it relates to solar and wind, we're seeing competitive rates over long-term contracts, and that's an authority that we're able to use in many cases. And so for us, in many cases it's the cost of power from a solar farm or a wind farm is no different than we might get from traditional power.
Okay, and one more thing. You did have two initiatives that you were talking about, and I'll get more information from you. One being this big green fleet you're going to launch. Do you want to mention anything about that?
Sure. So we have one of the initiatives, one of the 5 goals that the Secretary of the Navy laid out in October of 2009, and I'll just quickly mention those and maybe end with that. The first goal was that by 2020, half of our energy will come from alternative sources. Also by 2020, half of our energy on our shore, on our facilities, will come from alternative sources, and half of our installations will be net zero energy. By 2015, we'll reduce the petroleum use in our non-tactical vehicle fleet, our commercial vehicle fleet, by 50%, and then we will bring in energy into the acquisitions process as well, so that's valued in all the major systems that we acquire. The goal you just mentioned relates to our Great Green Fleet, and so what we're going to do in 2012 is to demonstrate a carrier strike group, including the air wing, including the service vessels, all on 50-50 blends of alternative fuels. Then in 2016, we're going to deploy that strike group. So not just do it an exercise over a course of several days, but actually deploy that group and look for, and we're going to have to find other sources of fuel to power that fleet as we go forward. So as we looking for those international partners who are going to be critical to that, who were critical to the Great White Fleet when we came around at the turn of the last century in powering the fleet, are going to be critical again to keeping this fleet on 50-50 blends of biofuels. All
right, and in closing, please just give your name and your position.
Sure. My name's Tom Hicks. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.